And I was walking home and I look up and in Vail, all the houses, multi-million-dollar, insane houses. And I'm walking back to this camper and I see like a family in their house and all these windows, all their lights are on. They're all in sweats and t-shirts. And I just remember staring up into the house thinking to myself how fortunate they are and how fortunate I've been my entire life to just have heat and to have a home and to have a roof over my head. And yeah, it really allowed me to appreciate things on such a deeper level.
Well, it's interesting just as I start to kind of like hear your story unfold. There's some themes that, make sense as we get to the work that you're doing now. Coaching, creating a beautiful night for people. I mean, you clearly like to be of service to others, to create experiences and things that move people. And before we kind of get to what you're up to now, I'm kind of curious about this part of you that continues to want to explore and maybe challenge yourself or kind of move, across the spectrum in from like having this beautiful, life in Vail where you're snowboarding 100 days and you're working in this restaurant and creating this experience to then just say, fuck it, I'm going to go live in my van. It's a pretty big jump. Again, you're making another jump. Talk to me about that. Tell me more about the decision and then the experience.
Yeah, I think my last year in Vail, I bought a camper. So I had a Tacoma with a camper. I lived in my buddy's driveway, which is like impossible to get away with in Vail. Like they do not mess around with people living in their RVs or campers. But my buddy's driveway, like dipped down and tucked down. There were some trees and like I had a wood burning stove in that thing because it was in the winter. Like it was cold and so yeah, I lived in that for a winter, and then the next summer I lived in the national forest, like 40 minutes outside of Vail, and would commute in. So I had this taste of like the simplistic life for a full year before I bought the van, and I fell in love with that life, like the minimalism. I fell in love with. I'll never forget walking home from the gym one night. There's a gym in that neighborhood that I lived in my camper, and it was so cold outside. It was single digits, and I knew I was going to be walking into a camper that I had to stoke the fire for like an hour and a half at least until I was like comfortable to go to bed. And I was walking home and I look up and in Vail, all the houses, multi-million-dollar, insane houses, and I'm walking back to this camper and I see like a family in their house and all these windows, all their lights are on, they're all in sweats and t-shirts. And I just remember staring up into the house thinking to myself how fortunate they are and how fortunate I've been my entire life to just have heat and to have a home and to have a roof over my head. And yeah, it really allowed me to appreciate things on such a deeper level. That from that moment on. And yeah, from that moment on, it was like, I want more of this, actually. I want more of like navigating the challenges of living in a camper or a van or whatever. So van life was always on my mind. And fortunately for COVID, actually for me, that's what pushed me out of restaurants. Vail was it was super rad because it was a seasonal position. So it was like 4 months on, 2 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off. And that was my schedule for like 4 years. And I would go travel internationally in the off season, go backpack, Southeast Asia, Mexico, Central America, Colombia, wherever. Go spend 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, Eastern Europe. Yeah, COVID hit and the restaurant closed. And I was like, if there's a time ever to buy a van, it's right now. And that's what I did. I was in Delaware for a couple of weeks during COVID, Found one in LA, flew to LA. The dude that sold it to me picked me up from the airport in it. We drove to the bank, paid him for it. He was off. I dropped him off at his house, and I was like, oh shit, I live in this thing now. Like, what? This is crazy. And yeah, with no plan on like what life was going to look like, what I was going to do with it, where I was going to live. I just ended a relationship with a partner that I was living with in Vail. We had an apartment together, and I bought the van, drove it back to Colorado, and moved the rest of my stuff out of the apartment, and was like, "It's yours. I'm off." Planned this like kind of 4-month road trip from Colorado up through the Tetons where I lived for a summer, and then to Montana, and then the plan was to go down the California coast and back to Colorado. I was on the road for 3 weeks before I got to Whitefish, Montana. I was supposed to be there for a week, and I stayed 2 years.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Whitefish last night.
We did.
And yeah, there's a lot of I don't know, intrigue on my part, as to all of that, really. That's all very interesting and sounds, in many ways appealing. Just the simplicity and the freedom and the beauty of the nature, and Montana definitely has a pretty strong energy of all of those things.
Definitely.
And I know you loved it until you got a little itchy to have more, because it can be quiet.
I got the itch.
Yeah, and so that took you to Salt Lake more recently.
That took me to San Diego.
Oh, San Diego. Okay.
Yep. So there was a year in San Diego. Yeah, I was 30. I was single in Whitefish, Montana, and I was like, I need a little bit more scene, some more music, some more food, some more dating scene.
Yep.
So yeah, drove the van to San Diego. Lived there for the year. Loved it. Definitely a party town.
Yeah.
And I found myself doing a lot of that, and which I enjoy, but yeah, wasn't fully aligned in what I was looking for, and was craving the mountains again.
Yeah.
And was ready to get back to them. So I went to visit Salt Lake last March when they had that insane season.
Yeah.
Snowboard season. I stayed 3 weeks and rode every day, and every day was like the best day ever.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is where I need to be. So packed up the van and moved to Salt Lake.
Well, let's talk about that, because there's a number of things you shared with me, and I had the luxury of seeing you work last night. And I know that's, a part of what you do. I know you've gone through John's coaching school, and you're up to some both great work, but also some pretty exciting adventure hobbies, passions, and so tell me about kind of how you arrived at the work you're doing.
Yeah.
And also, literally how you started to take the jumps that you take, out of airplanes and, all the other, super high adventure stuff that you're doing.
Yeah. So I guess, I was still living in Vail when I was in Mexico for 6 weeks. I shared this story last night, but I was in Mexico for 6 weeks, and ended up receiving the news that one of my best friends in the entire world that I grew up with had passed away. And I had like a week left of that trip and was just devastated. It was pretty much just like bottle of tequila a day, doing anything I could to just numb and to not feel any emotions that were attached to that loss. And I ended up booking this Airbnb that was like a beachside bungalow in this town called Yalapa. I was actually there to paraglide the first week of my trip. The town's only accessible by boat. It's this little super rad cove beach town in south of Puerto Vallarta. Couldn't get there. All the water taxis, like a bunch of them got destroyed from the storm. So I left my paragliding equipment at this woman's home that I was staying with for a couple days, and I was like, can I come back in like 6 weeks and pick this up and try to make it down there? And she was like, yeah, sure. So I ended up making it there, and I booked this beachside bungalow and show up, and it's this retreat center. So people are doing yoga and plant medicine and juice cleansing and all the things, and had no idea what breathwork was at the time, and kind of got to know this facilitator over a couple of days. She was doing like grief ceremonies and all these things that were really aligned with what I was like going through. And she offered to lead me in a 1-on-1 breathwork journey, and it changed my life. Like completely. The journey was wild. So much pain, so much anger and grief and sadness in the first half. And then second half was just all these memories of us together, and from childhood and middle school and high school and college. And yeah, just coming out of that experience with so much gratitude for having him in my life. Speaking of creative energy, like I didn't write at the time at all. I didn't do any journaling. I came out of that and I wrote this insane poem that like all rhymed and flowed and was all about his life, that I read at his celebration of life. I was just like so clear on his loss and just like accepting it. And there's no way I could have gotten to that point in that time frame doing anything else other than this breathwork journey. So it blew me away. And yeah, that was the catalyst to me really wanting to learn more of it. And right when COVID hit in 2020, right when I bought the van, I was kind of nudged into men's work from a very close friend of mine. And she was someone that I still like confide in, tell everything to. And she knows how many friends I have, male friends, and all the sports that I do, snowboarding, my boys at the restaurant at the time, skydiving, whatever it was. But like she was the one that I felt safe enough to open up to about anything I was struggling with. She's like, you need men in your life that you feel comfortable sharing these things with too. And yeah, kind of nudged me into Everyman, it's called. They have a podcast, men's groups. And then two of the coaches from that broke away, created this program called The Unshakable Man.
Okay.
And it was a 12-week men's emotional awareness program. And I got into that. And that was really like my introduction into like men's work, emotional awareness, how to be vulnerable, how to communicate, and continuous weekly breathwork ceremonies.
Yeah, interesting. I'm kind of curious to hear more about the men's work. I think that's becoming more talked about. And I think there's a lot of, discussion, sort of good and bad. Sometimes it can be dismissed as like bro-y culture, and sometimes it's like the opposite of that, right? Where you're really like learning as men how to be more vulnerable, authentic, access, more sensitive sides, creative sides. I mean, it can be a lot of things. And sometimes I even think like the bro-y stuff gets like a bad rap, even like sometimes like there's sort of an energetic thing that some men, not all, need to express, whether that be in the form of fitness or riding motorcycles or whatever else that, might, get, a bad rap. Maybe you could just talk a little bit more about like the way that men's work has been beneficial for you.
Yeah. When I started that program, the 12-week course, it was all virtual during COVID. And I was like, there's no shot I'm going to feel connected to any of these dudes like through this computer. And I'll never forget the first like group that we had. And this one guy opened up, big dude, like burly, huge beard. And he just like opened up about what he was struggling with, started bawling his eyes out. I started bawling my eyes out. I was like, holy shit, like this works. There's other people that are struggling and need these spaces. And it's been incredibly influential into my life, not only as a participant, but like as a facilitator as well. And when I facilitate, I too like use those spaces to be held as well. And like to use the men in that group to support me, even while I'm like the facilitator or whatever. But as I create these spaces for men, as I continue to, it's so clear how much men are craving that connective space with other men, and how hard it is to actually make friends as an adult. That's another thing that I just see that men are struggling with. They don't know where to meet guys that they feel open enough to connect with. And I think what's really important when you mention like the bro culture, whether that is like hyper masculine things like CrossFit or riding motorcycles like John does, like why can't we have both?
Right.
right? Like, why can't you go for a ride with your boy and on the bike, but then like stop and get coffee and then actually ask each other like, how are you doing?
Right.
Like, what are you actually going through?
Yeah.
What are you actually feeling? Are you feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think it's so important. And I work with all people, but my passion is to work with men.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to continue to do that. I'm continuing to create those spaces, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, whether it's through breath work, whether it's through, plant medicine, whatever it is. Like, I want men to have a space where they can open up, and I love to see it.